Chapter 25. The days went by slowly after Herr Schnell's departure. During the first month, Okey found it difficult to believe that he would not return. She struggled with feelings of desertion, but tried very hard not to let sadness show. She loved taking care of Louis, now 2 months old. His baby laughter made her laugh too. Sometimes Mrs. Veerkamp would put her arms around Okey and Louis, hugging them both, and Okey could feel the love flowing around her. Mrs. Veerkamp taught her how to do needlework and how to cook. She learned quickly. She usually hummed quietly while she worked. One day she overheard Mrs. Veerkamp say to her husband, "I like having a girl in my family." Okey liked being part of this family too, and she enjoyed working with Mrs. Veerkamp. They laughed together when Mrs. Veerkamp tried to teach Okey how to speak English. She could not speak it very well, even though she practiced often. She could understand it much better than she could speak it. Mrs. Veerkamp and Okey always had tea in the afternoon in the kitchen. Okey prepared the tea while Mrs. Veerkamp fed Louis. Today was another dry day, no rain, but this farm had wells that were still giving water, enough for field plants and farmhouse. Okey poured the tea. She sat at the table with her hands folded tightly around the hot cup and said quietly, "Mrs. Veerkamp-san, I think of my mother now." Mrs. Veerkamp was just starting to take her first sip of tea. Her hand stopped in midair. She placed the cup back on the table, looked directly at Okey, and said gently, "Please, Okey, tell me about your parents. I know they must love you very much." Okey sighed. She had wanted so badly to talk about her family, but there was never the opportunity. Wasn't she just the nanny? Now Mrs. Veerkamp was willing to listen, so Okey began to share memories, good memories with her, in halting English mixed with Japanese words. She talked about the old kiyaki tree in the yard, her trips to the market, helping Mother in the garden, and when she talked of Father, she remembered his sternness and also his love. She showed Mrs. Veerkamp the whistle he had made. The memories surprisingly brought smiles and laughter, along with some sadness. By the second month, Okey did not feel homesick anymore. She often sang while she worked, and she tried to teach the younger boys how to sing her songs. No matter how hard they tried, they could not pronounce the words. Still, they always asked her to sing. Okey visited the top of the hill every day at sunset. She kneeled on her quilt and looked out toward the mountains, the ones that reminded her of Mount Seiburi near her home in Wakamatsu, Japan. She was at peace. Sometimes, though, when she closed her eyes, she could almost see a wagon coming up the road with 2 little girls leaning over the sides, laughing and waving, and then she felt a pang of remorse. There was very little work being done on the Wakamatsu tea and silk farm. Kuninosuke visited Matsu and Okey often, and he offered news that was not good. Many workers were leaving the farm in search of other jobs. Supplies were almost gone, and food was scarce, so Kuninosuke had sold some of the animals to local farmers. He shared the proceeds with the other workers. Some of them talked about going back to Japan as soon as they could earn enough money. They no longer expected Herr Schnell to return. Sundays were restful days on the farm. Nights were longer now, sun setting later in the sky. On Sundays, Matsu hiked up the hill with Okey, carrying a picnic basket. They would share a meal Mrs. Veerkamp had prepared for them, and they would kneel together on the quilt, sometimes looking at each other and sometimes looking past the hilltops toward their old home in Japan. Okey was content. She enjoyed time spent alone with Matsu, and she permitted herself to dream of future happiness. At the end of 3 months, Okey began to feel tired and weak again. Her treks up the hill became a bit more difficult, and she walked slower. Then her illness came back with a vengeance, attacking her body from the inside. Her beautiful black hair became limp, with no shine to it. She could not walk with Matsu. She could not laugh with him. The pain took all other thoughts away. She could smile, though. Always she smiled at him. The Gold Hill doctor came to see her, to examine her. He did bring flowers, and he did hide them behind his back, but when he came into the room, he brought them out slowly, and he did not say, "Surprise." He became quiet, and when he opened his new medicine case, he seemed to find nothing in there that could cure her. The doctor brought medicine to help with the pain. He did not bring hope. After the doctor left, Okey said, "Matsu-san, I am not going to get better, am I?" She looked at him, begging him to tell her she was wrong. He did not answer, and she realized that he could not. The answer was already in his eyes. "Matsu-san," she said a few days later, "I do not want to be a burden, but I do want to climb my hill. Will you help me?" She spent all her time in bed now. Matsu, the samurai, the warrior, bowed low and spoke with fervor and humor in his voice. "I would carry you to the top of a mountain and back 100 times, no, 1,000 times, if only you should ask, for you are no burden at all." The nanny and the samurai had always been very good at pretending. Matsu carried Okey up the hill every evening when his chores were done. They kneeled together on the knoll, listening to the little birds' cheerful melodies. The samurai held her, his arms wrapped gently around her, so she could look toward her beloved Japan. Sometimes he hummed to her, his voice mingling with the bird's melody. One day Okey was so ill she could barely talk. Mrs. Veerkamp held her in her arms and sang to her. Okey grasped her hand and whispered, "Arigato." She remembered the many good things this kind lady had done for her. Mrs. Veerkamp smoothed Okey's hair back as she lowered her down on the bed. She placed her hands gently on each side of Okey's face, leaned close, and said, "You have been a joy to us, Okey. You have been like a daughter to me." She brushed her hands along Okey's cheeks, no longer smooth and young, kissed her one last time, and quietly left the room. Soon Henry came in to say goodbye. He sat beside her, but words did not come. Okey smiled at him, this boy who was her age, first her friend, then her brother. She felt old and tired. Was she really only 19 years old? Later, Matsu kneeled down beside her bed. Okey looked at him and tried to reach out to touch his face. She felt the familiar warmth fill her heart. She loved being with him. She was safe in his arms. Still, the desire to go home to Japan was strong. "Matsu-san, will you carry me to the top of my hill one more time?" Matsu wrapped the quilt around her, picked her up, and carried her across the field and up the hill. The sun was beginning to set, and the sky was a vivid red, soon turning to gold, with bright streaks of light fanning out as the sun slid behind the horizon. He very carefully kneeled down and held her on his lap. They looked at the beautiful sunset together. After a while, Okey asked, "Matsu-san, why did Schnell-san leave, and why has he not returned?" "I do not know, Okey. I believe he wanted to come back. He did not want the colony to fail. Do you remember how happy he was when the plants were healthy and growing? We were all happy then." He looked directly into her eyes. "I promise you, Okey, that I will never leave you." "Oh, Matsu-san, arigato." She paused, taking short, shallow breaths, then reached up to touch his face. "What is that on your cheek? A samurai does not shed tears." He gently covered her hand with his. "Why must I not shed tears? First I think of happiness and what might have been. Then I am sad because I cannot help you. Okey-san, I am losing you today." "Oh, Matsu-san, how can I leave you? I do not want to go." They knelt together, not talking, just kneeling, tears falling, mingling into one steady stream. Finally, Okey said, "Matsu-san, please sing to me." "Okey-san, I cannot sing now." "I am too tired to talk," she whispered. But I can hear you. Please? He rested his head gently on hers, and he sang, not loudly. Okay closed her eyes and was at peace as she listened to the beautiful music that would take her home. The end.